Hello and welcome to the Inside Elland Road Podcast. Anyone who listened to last week's episode, it'll be no surprise to say myself and Graham are dialing in for witness protection this week after we found Leeds United not guilty on all 5 counts. Graham, have you got a new witness protection name? You enjoying your new surroundings?
I'm going to call myself Joe Donahue, I think. And I'm going to, if people want to find me, they can find me at an address in London. Maybe the offices of 442 if they want to send me anything in the post. Yeah, it's amazing how quickly things can change, isn't it? Where are we recording that episode today? Maybe we would look entirely foolish for changing on the basis of one game, but it's not really one game, is it? Things have been so finely poised that I think a couple of results in either direction and we'd be saying very, very different things. You know, had they gone to Brighton and got a point, had they gone to Forest and won, we'd be saying absolutely magnificent, what a job he's doing, what a job they've done. But sadly, it's the manner of the defeats, it's the way they've lost those 2 games and the complete absence of competitiveness, I would say. Everything, all the confidence that was built up, all the momentum that was built up, and the feel-good factor was built on Leeds being competitive. And we can get into that and what that looks like and what that needs to be. But if that's not there, then the mood very, very quickly changes. And I can well understand a lot of the frustration and the worries that people have because it was not good at the City Ground.
Yeah, it is the manner of the defeats which is more worrying, like you say. If you think of the defeats to Spurs, there's defeats to Fulham, you know, there was a lot in those performances to say, oh, look, Leeds have been a bit unlucky here and there was loads of things going right. These 2 defeats have been really damning in terms of performances. And in terms of what I expected from this team and what we were sold on in the summer in terms of recruitment, it seems to be missing. The kind of physicality, being like really tough and difficult to beat, it doesn't seem like that is happening. And that's a worry because that is the strategy. The strategy was, and look, I'm someone who, I feel like I get dragged into this, the reality of being pragmatic in the Premier League and playing a certain way, which is not really the way I like the game to be played. But with the squad we've got, you know, it is be good on set pieces, be very difficult, be hard to break down, but they have not seemed hard to break down at all in those last 2 games. And it really is worrying. And that is why Farke is under a lot of pressure. And it does feel like there's a growing... It's hard because you're looking at social media to try and tell you what every fan thinks, and that's not a fair barometer. I think you would say that maybe being in the ground is a fairer barometer and maybe talking to people in and around, going to and from games. Have you got an indication of what the consensus is?
Yeah, I think you are right. I also think there's a danger in just kind of decrying everyone on social media as reactive bampots, you know, that are just going off half-cocked all the time and changing their opinions. There are a lot of very reasonable-minded, very knowledgeable Leeds fans who don't manage to get to games. But it's definitely, and I know this from personal experience, it's definitely a lot easier to lose your rag and to shoot from the hip on social media than it is if you're in a conversation on the way out of a ground, you know, when you've actually been in there and experienced it. And it's been more of a collective, a collective experience. I think what should kind of concern the 49ers and what should concern Daniel Farke was the displays of anger from the away end at full time at the City Ground. A lot of fans had gone by the time Daniel Farke and his players approached them, and they didn't take that long to go and approach them. And a lot of those who were there applauded, and a lot of those who were there were saying, you know, go away, essentially, physically demonstrating how unhappy they were with the performance and what had transpired. And I think what it boils down to is that the games against Newcastle, the game against Fulham, the game against Bournemouth, the game against Spurs, regardless almost of what the result was, you could see that the way Leeds were playing and that the way that we're set up and the tactics were geared towards survival. It was all geared towards survivor ball. The way they went direct against Bournemouth and caused them so many problems, you know, good from set pieces, going to Calvert-Lewin, all of that. you could see that working across the season. So then when you go to Brighton and you try and play and you get picked off and you give the ball away and you concede 3 almost identical goals and you follow it up by going to Forest, you score first, you concede within 90 seconds, which is a massive red flag in terms of the team's concentration, the team's game management, their confidence. Then you also concede 3 goals and there's free runners in the area and you're not playing direct properly. You know, what Leeds were doing was passing around quite safely at the back. The ball went to Beal. Forest came across. Beal was pushed to the touchline. He tried to send it long on his left and it wasn't accurate and Forest mopped it up. Leeds didn't go direct with purpose. They didn't seem to go direct all that willingly. And so when they did, the number 9 was isolated. He was on his own. Whereas when Forest went direct, it was with purpose. It was very intentional. They had bodies high up the pitch. They had a presence. When you've seen 2 games in a row where Leeds seem to have got it wrong, they've shipped 6 goals in those 2 games, and their XG has been less? Well, maybe just a shade over 1 for the games combined. It's a concern. It's a serious concern, and the international break has almost come at a very bad time because there's no immediate chance for Farke and the team to go out, at Elland Road and reassure everyone with a better performance, with a positive result, and kind of just quieten down the noise. Instead, there's this great big void, no club football for 2 weeks, into which people will just spew their concerns, their worries, their anger, their venom, and so it really piles the pressure on the Villa game because of how far away it is and because of what it means now.
Yeah, and we'll preview the Villa game next week, and the big topic is Daniel Farke and won't he be sacked? You have said, I think, online, and you were on the Square Ball saying that you'd be very surprised if he was sacked now. So is that kind of the noise you're hearing around the club, that there's going to be no changes before the Villa game?
Yeah, that was the sense I was getting on Sunday night. I haven't heard anything to change my mind on that. It was kind of what I'd thought anyway, prior to kind of when I was thinking about it in the wake of full time. My thought was, I don't see them making a change straight away. I don't see them reacting to these 2 defeats by sacking Daniel Farke. Obviously, when there's such an outcry from a fan base, it asks a question of an ownership, and sometimes it begs a response, and because sometimes there's an inevitability about it, where if you lose a fan base, do you ever really get them back? Daniel Farke, he lost some people in the first year that he's never got back. If he loses a great swathe of the fan base, does that ever turn, or is it just a case of you're waiting for things to go wrong and then you react and then you sack him? But I didn't expect them to make a change at that point, and the noises we were getting were exactly that the credit he built up with the start of the season, it was not going to evaporate that quickly. That said, this is football, so even as I'm saying on the Square Ball or in my verdict piece from Forest, even as I'm saying we don't expect a change, you never really know what can happen in football. Things can change, in an instant. What was true this morning might not be true this afternoon, and sounds very much like I'm covering my own back here, doesn't it? But what I'm trying to say is, if a scenario arose where suddenly a manager that they absolutely were in love with came to them and said, "Oh, I'd like the job," maybe an ownership changes its mind, or maybe something happens with Farke, maybe there's a disagreement, and anything can happen, is what I'm trying to say. But I would still be very, very surprised, really surprised, if he wasn't the manager to lead them into Villa. And I'm going to be really honest, right? It's not that I'm sitting on the fence. Well, I suppose I am. But I really don't know what they should do. I don't know that they should keep him, because I'm really worried after those 2 performances. And it's not just those 2 performances, is it? It's the fact that they've dropped 4 out of 5. It's the fact that they didn't reward those performances against Bournemouth, against Fulham, against Spurs with the points they should have got. And because they didn't, Now they're in this bad spell, and it looks all the worse, and it's a bit more negative really than we expected. I am worried. At the same time, having seen what happened at Rangers, and I know it's different personalities involved, different football departments. They took so long to make a decision at Rangers that things turned unbelievably toxic. Like, things got to an unreasonable level of toxicity before they acted and got rid of Russell Martin. And then the managerial appointment process was not smooth. And regardless of what Parag Marathi said, after they came out and spoke to the public when they were appointing Danny Rule, it did not come across as a well thought out strategic process. It did not look that way at all. My concern would be that the getting the next bit right. Say they decided today, actually, we don't see a way to survival with Daniel Farke. We don't think he's quite aligned his football with the strategy that we all agreed to and came up with in the summer and recruited towards. We're going to make a change. The next bit is so unbelievably crucial, because if you get the managerial appointment wrong, it's over. You know, your season's done, because it's not going to work out. Because what a season cannot survive, and I've seen it. We can talk about what I witnessed at Chesterfield and at Leeds. If you get your recruitment wrong and you get the succession plan wrong when you make a managerial change, you're done for. Like, the season can't survive that. So if the 49ers did decide to make a change, getting it spot on is absolutely vital, so crucial. And added to that, say they go out at Villa, right, and they return to being competitive, and they return to being resolute, and they sort out the defensive problems, and they're as hard to beat as they were against Newcastle and Bournemouth, and they get something, they get a win. I think a lot of the people who at the minute are in the concerned and worried camp and not the angry get him out camp, I think they're back on side and they're reassured.
Celebrate Christmas in style at Uyare. Rooftop views, carol-inspired feasts, and festive cocktails, creating Leeds' most unforgettable holiday atmosphere. I think that's a really good way of framing it, and I would put myself in the concerned camp rather than the get him out camp. And I caveat that also because of the timing and the fixtures on the horizon. I don't think it's an ideal time to be bringing someone in. You know, the new manager bounce, I don't know how much it's been studied, but we've all seen cases where a new manager comes in and a team look different. And if you bring in a new manager and their first few games are Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, you can kind of like completely nullify and dampen that at the outset. And I just think he's got enough credit in the bank in what he's done on the whole with the club to get the next few games. He can't lose them all. I think he needs to get something in one of those games where any neutral is going to be picking the other team to win. Any neutral is going to be picking Villa to beat us after their result at Bournemouth. And then Man City, Chelsea and Liverpool, you know, even I'm going to struggle to find a way in my mind to pick a Leeds win in any of those. I mean, Man City look like they've clicked again. So I am not going to sit on the fence. I don't think they should sack him. And that is because I think I've seen enough this year in some games to give him a chance to have the squad put in those performances again. But it can't continue for much longer in the way it has. And if he loses to Villa and loses another couple, I think then you have to start thinking about, there's a couple of fixtures before January which do look okay, and you think maybe then is the time to pull the trigger. And I really don't like the idea of sacking managers. I think it's easy to jump to that, but sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, and it's a hard thing to get right, like you said. So I don't think they should sack him yet, and I think he is warranted the next few games. I'm aware I'm in the minority. I was with some Leeds fans yesterday, including Dean from the Square Ball, and I think the consensus was there was a kind of begrudging, I think it might be time. So I'm aware I'm in the minority view, but that's kind of where I stand on it.
Yeah, it's I don't like it either. I don't like the idea that you just become another sacking club, and I don't like the idea that a man who got you 100 points, got you a title, and got you into the Premier League could just be discarded. I was almost going to say after 2 defeats, but again, it's not 2 defeats. It's 4 defeats in 5. It's a trend. It's the punch resistance going completely defensively. I mean, that is, I think, what I hinge my big concerns on. The fact that no one is picking these players up when they run into the box. The players are having free rein. It's not just in the last 2 games either. Think about the goal they conceded, the equaliser at home to Bournemouth. They could have won the first header. Pascal could have won the first header. But then the ball goes to the back post, and Tanaka and whoever else, maybe Ampadu, I can't quite recall, they've let a man go completely free, and then he volleys in at the far post, completely unmarked. Fast forward to West Ham, you're 2-0 up at home in a game that I think we discussed at length. I felt Leeds really should have gone for it and put their foot on the throat and their foot on the gas and just taken it away from West Ham. Continued like the first half. They sat back, they sat deep. West Ham didn't create a great deal, but then in the stoppage time, the ball comes into the area and Ampadu lets the man go free. He's completely free. And he's in a little corridor between centre-backs and defensive midfield. So we've seen it before. It was those were little warning shots that I don't think have been heeded, because now look at what's happened in the Brighton game. Look at what's happened in the Forest game. And somewhere between midfield and central defence, something is going wrong that needs to be fixed immediately. You cannot, in the Premier League, you cannot have players free with that level of freedom and time, because you're giving your goalkeeper no chance. That's not how to be competitive in the Premier League, is it? And I think at Forest we saw one of the most kind of egregious examples of it when Yacobiol locks his eyes on Morgan Gibbs-White, and then it's like he almost instantly can't see him. It's like his object permanence abandons him, and Morgan Gibbs-White's no longer there. And I saw Jamie Carragher's analysis of it, where as the cross was about to come in, Yacobiol puts his hands behind his back, but Yacobiol's not defending the cross. He's not the first man. That's Goodmanson. Yacobiol is like 10 yards away from the cross, so why his hands are behind his back for a start? He's putting himself at a physical disadvantage. And what Carragher wanted to see was big, wide, arms out wide, so you can at least touch and get near Morgan Gibbs-White and then affect him. If you're close to him, you can then go and impact him. You're close enough to try and get your head on the ball. You just let him go. And then the ball comes in. It's a good ball from Amari Hutchinson, who, what a substitution that was. And then Leeds have conceded again. And it's worrying. It's alarming. When goals are going in that easily, it's very, very worrying.
It's more worrying because under Bielsa, there were times where you saw the team sheet put out and you almost thought, we're going to have to outscore them here because we're going to be quite open, because maybe Phillips was injured and we didn't have anyone to cover for him. But you look at the team sheet that we put out in the past few games, and on paper, it looks like quite a defensive setup where even the 3 midfielders are playing would be, their defensive attributes are more what they're known for than their offensive ones. So to put in these performances where we look so open, when on paper the team look like, if they're going to be anything, they're going to be resolute, competitive, defensive, it's even more worrying. And yeah, should we get into Forest and then we can maybe do some more Farke stuff? But I was saying to my friends yesterday, I don't know if it's an age thing, but the older I get, the more drawn I get to World War II documentaries. And I was watching a 2-hour documentary on the horrors of the Eastern Front on the weekend, and it wasn't the most depressing thing I'd watched after the Forest game. It just, even though we went 1-0 up, that was basically all we did until we went 2-3-1 down. And I know you mentioned about we didn't go long, and Mecca actually took the goal really well. It's a really good finish, exactly what we want for centre forward. And it was, I after that, though, I don't think he covered himself in glory when he did get the ball in moments when we were looking for him to hold it up. He seemed to go down quite easily. He seemed to not do what we need. He wasn't a DCL replacement. I thought he was sold as. And I haven't seen enough of him yet to really make a judgment call. And he's got 2 goals and 2 starts. So in that respect, he's doing his job. But there was just so many things which just didn't seem right. And that's sometimes a warning sign as well with, are the players still buying into the manager and what he wants from them?
Yeah, I think there was a Leeds United fan who'd managed to use a contact to get himself plonked in the press box, and he was right next to me. And what continually came up in the first half was when the ball went up top, Leeds United's target man, and that's what he's there to be. He's there to be a platform, there to be a target, even if the service to him wasn't fantastic. And even if he's up against an absolute monster in Milenkovic, he just went to ground looking for free kicks. He was backing into his man and losing his footing. And I thought there was a moment in the first half where he changed his boots, came to the sideline, changed his boots, and I thought, okay, he's struggling with the surface. And let me tell you, listener, the boots did not help. It wasn't the boots that were the problem, because he was unable to keep his feet. He was unable to keep the ball. I think I counted once when he actually held the ball up and knocked it off to someone. And yes, I will caveat it again, the long ball service to him wasn't great. And maybe it played into Milenkovic's hands by just hanging it up and letting it be a fight ball. Maybe it needed to be a bit more purposeful. Put it in behind and let him, let the centre back turn and chase after him and harry him. I don't know, but he didn't do enough. He took his goal wonderfully, and it was a really clinical finish. I had quite a few people saying, would Calvert-Lewin have finished it like that? Probably not on the evidence we've seen so far this season. But after the goal, what Leeds needed, they didn't get. And they were really, really missing Calvert-Lewin. But I know that defending starts from the front, and I know that holding the ball up would have given Leeds a bit more of a platform, but they had plenty of possession in that game. So I think that ultimately the blame goes to the defending and the defensive structure and the organisation and the concentration levels. I think we have to have a little conversation about the changes that Farke has made, changes that we wanted to see. So we can't very well, decry those changes now. We wanted to see Perry come in because they signed him as a starter, they signed him as their first choice. Has he actually made them better yet, would you say?
No, I would say, he had that kind of amazing double save, which I don't think even mattered in the end at the start. I don't feel any different than I did when Darla was starting. From what I've seen so far.
That's probably fair. Now, we should say he's not getting a great deal of protection. There's not a great deal your goalkeeper can do when you're letting runners crash the box freely and get shots away and get headers away. You're asking the impossible from him. But I don't think he covered himself in glory for the first.
I'm saying that because Darlow was okay. I'm not saying Darlow was a calamity at all. It's just it hasn't been an upgrade so far.
Yeah. Now, what I'll say on Beal and Struijk, because I had somebody come for me on Twitter saying, "Are you still going to be on the pod saying that Struijk should come out the team?" Let's have a little think about what was happening before Beal came in to the team. Struijk, I thought at Burnley, was very poor. And Beal wasn't playing in that game, but there was a free header. A man drifted into the box. It wasn't perhaps Struijk's fault, but Farke himself said after the game that if your central midfielder, it was Stack who switched off. If your central midfielder switches off for a second, then maybe you hope that your central defender will react a bit better. And so maybe he wanted Rodon or Struijk. I can't remember who was closest to it at the time. Struijk might have been drawn out wide. I can't quite picture it in my head. But then later in the game, he gave the ball away, and Kyle Walker blew right past him. And there's always been a little question mark about Struijk on the turn and against pace. and he wobbled. Struijk was definitely having a wobbly patch. Now, that doesn't mean that he was no good, and it doesn't mean that he wasn't influential in Leeds United's build-up, because he definitely is. And to my mind, given what we've seen so far, Struijk is a safer bet on the ball and a more accurate deliverer of the ball than Biol. I think if Struijk is in the same situations that Biol was in on Sunday, getting pressed towards the touchline, I think Struijk does something better with it than an undercooked chipped ball for a number 9 that gives him little chance, or that just simply gives the ball to the Forest fullback. But let's not pretend that Struijk was perfect before Biol came in. And I think it was fair to want to have a look at Biol. I think it's also fair to say that Biol hasn't yet played a lot of football for Leeds United, but he too hasn't covered himself in glory. You know, he hasn't pulled up any trees, and I think he needs to be a lot better.
Yeah, from what we've seen so far, I think Struijk has edged Biol. And I say that with someone who was also saying I'd like to see Biol come in. I still think at that time that was the right call to make. I mean, we signed Biol as a starting centre-back. And actually, when I saw some breakdowns of him, his kind of long diagonal distribution was one of the attributes people have kind of pointed out. We haven't seen that yet. It's a question mark now whether Struijk comes back in for Villa. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Biol was not covering himself in glory. He did pretty well at West Ham. There was a mistake kind of late on. But the past 2 games, he hasn't. He hasn't hit the heights at all. So Perry and Biol were names we'd mentioned to come in, and I think it's fair to say neither of them have been an upgrade, and potentially Biol has been a slight downgrade on Struijk. The other,
which is a
kind of area we looked at. Yes, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, which is a big concern.
Yeah, it is a big concern, because was he our first signing? Well, Becca was the first, I think, who came in, wasn't he? But Biol was in that first kind of flurry.
He was the first one that
they targeted for a while, and
first one they spent real money on.
Then there was I keep flip-flopping on this, but the Stack Tanaka midfield slot, I still edge it to Tanaka just because he gives us more on the ball. But I don't know. Neither of them are like grabbing the shirt. And you could even say after a really strong start, Longstaff and even Ampadu, I don't think any of them have covered themselves in glory in the past few games.
No, and this is not a squad that can afford to have 4, 5, 6, 7 players playing below their level. I don't think Ampadu has been very good for the last couple of games. I think as a leader, he needs to step up in a big, big way. He needs to affect games. Sometimes I think, we're being too harsh. We're asking too much of individuals, right? And then I think about how I completely underestimated the likes of Dan Ballard and Trai Hume, right? Northern Irish internationals who I thought were really going to struggle in the Premier League. Now they might go on to have more difficulties this season or have ups and downs in form like all players do. But I look at the way Ballard played against Arsenal at the weekend, right? He scores a goal, he sets a goal up, he makes an unbelievable block right in the last minute to safeguard a point for Sunderland against Arsenal. Players can make themselves enormous factors in games when they're absolutely on it. And I think Ampadu has it in him to be a big factor for Leeds United in the Premier League. Longstaff does. We've seen it. Against Newcastle, he was absolutely phenomenal. He was superb. He was everywhere. Maybe helped that he could read their game and read their midfield and knew their tells and all that. But he showed himself to be a player capable of being a big factor in a Premier League game. What Leeds haven't really shown yet is that Stack or Tanaka can be a massive factor in a Premier League game. What I want to see from Tanaka when he plays is dictating the pace of Leeds United's play, injecting a bit of urgency and forward motion into it with forward passes. And I want to see him getting forward and creating, scoring goals, shots from distance. He just hasn't done it yet. And Stack, I think we're still trying to work out what it is exactly that he's going to bring as a factor. You know, we know he can cover distance. We know that he has a good shot on him, but he's not enough of a factor. He's not making himself a star man in the midfield. And Brighton had star quality in individuals. You know, Minte just put his hand in the air and said, give me the ball, I'll do it. Ruter does the same. Forest showed that they had better individual quality than Leeds. And if you're up against a side with superior individual quality, everybody needs to be 7 or 8 out of 10. You can't have 4s, 5s, and 6s. Because if you have 4, 5, and 6s, that means there's a real danger that one of them is going to lose out in a battle to their direct opponent and you're going to concede a goal. Goodmanson has come up against a couple of very, very good wingers and hasn't been able to get the best of them in 1 or 2 duels, and Leeds have conceded from it. That's the harsh reality of the Premier League. And Goodmanson's been great this season. He's been one of Leeds' real star performers. But you need everyone to be absolutely on it. So if Goodmanson doesn't stop the cross, then Be-All needs to be tight to Morgan Gibbs-White. Everybody needs to look after everyone else, really, and cover for those individual blips or individual mistakes or slips or whatever it is. And Leeds they didn't have that collective ability to make a difference against Forest, and they didn't have the individual ability to make a difference, and they didn't have substitutions that changed the game, and Forest did.
Book your Christmas party at Uyare. Skyline dining, bold South Indian flavours, and rooftop elegance guarantee a festive season to remember. I want to talk about another area of the pitch because you mentioned Goodmanson, and the left-hand side of our team has been the strongest on the whole this season in terms of going forward. The right-hand side in the past few games has had Brendan Aronson, who we lauded after the West Ham game, but that is looking like an anomaly. And I remember when the team sheet came out, because I'd heard that everyone had trained. I think Nonto had trained for 2 weeks. James should have been fit. I really thought that James was going to start and we'd see Nonto from the bench, and Aronson maybe be coming on in the number 10 role if we needed a goal. But it was a bit disappointing to see Aronson on the right when James and Nonto are, from what I understood from the press conferences, fit, and that looked like a mistake in hindsight as well. And it was a mistake a lot of us kind of felt with foresight. And yeah, the Nonto thing I just don't understand, because we don't have many good attacking, game-changing players, and he's done it in the Premier League before. So his omission I just did not get at all. Farke kind of said afterwards that James didn't play because of, I think he said it was performance-related, and I didn't really... the Nonto answer I felt was a little evasive, but yeah, that was a huge mistake, I think. I think this isn't hindsight bias for lots of us. I think many of us thought as soon as James comes back fit, he should start. And if Nonto's fit, he'll be challenging for that spot.
Yeah. It plays into this suggestion that Farke is risk averse, or that he's... well, he said himself he's a pessimistic realist, and that's what I'm seeing when he's picking Aronson. He's thinking we need more defensive cover. But like you said earlier, you've got 3 midfielders who should be covering you defensively. You've got fullbacks who can get up and down. And also you've got a real lack of attacking threat. You just do. That's a fact about this Leeds team. Aronson is not bringing attacking threat, not on a consistent level to any degree. And Dan James, whilst he has not been on it since he came back, he's not been at his absolute best this season by any stretch. At least on Sunday, he tried to get at Forest and he cut back onto his left foot and he tried to put the ball in the box. He put a couple of crosses in. They weren't his best and they weren't his best efforts, but it was something. And it was something Leeds hadn't had prior to him coming on. As for Gnonto, it's very, very hard to understand. And I almost had my head in my hands when Farke said we decided not to take the risk. I thought, he's been back in team training for 2 weeks. Now, Ethan Ampadu, right? I know all players are different. Ethan Ampadu can be back in team training once, and he'll be back in the team. He's that kind of player. I'd be stunned if Willy Gnonto wasn't fit enough to play half an hour in a Premier League game after 2 weeks. Yes, he was out for a while. He's been back in team training for 2 weeks. Willy Gnonto, for me, represents potential still in the Premier League, because I think he can make a difference I don't know if he's a 90-minute player who's going to absolutely shine, but I know that if I had him, I'd want him on the pitch if you needed a goal against Nottingham Forest. Because if he gets the ball 25 yards, 30 yards out, I'd back him to get a strike away that troubles the goalkeeper at the very least. And I don't see Aronson doing that. I like the way Gnonto roams around as well, and I like the way he used to pop over to the other side and combine with Chris Somerville. You know, I wondered if he'd be able to do that a little bit with Okafor and bring something different for Leeds, but I'd like to see him. I'd like to see it tried at the very least. So it was odd to not have him on the team sheet. And it kind of, remember when I said a while back, I could still see him playing Aronson in certain away games. I would not have anticipated one of those away games being Nottingham Forest, a side who hadn't won a league game since the opening day. I just wouldn't have seen that. And yet, that's what he did, and I don't think there was any real reward from it.
Yeah, and we both said we were worried about that Forest fixture because of Dyke coming in and because of the quality they've got, even if they haven't shown it yet. And the thing which disappointed me the most is that I could have envisaged a 2-1 Nottingham Forest win with like Elliot Anderson and Gibbs White and just their quality looking really good. I didn't actually think they were that good. I thought Ndoye had good moments. Hutchinson looked good off the bench. They didn't really need to actually be that good. You wouldn't have said, they were actually just a lot better quality than us. They won 3-1, and I don't think they're coming off the pitch thinking they played blinders. I think it just was a bit too easy for them. And that is a big worry. And that goes back into the kind of conversation about away form. We haven't seen that at home, it does give me hope, but you have to pick up some points away, and they can't just be away at the worst team in the league, Wolves. You have to get points elsewhere. We do have 3 home games in the next 4. That's the good news. The bad news is it's Aston Villa, Chelsea and Liverpool. And the away game around then is Man City. If we are agreed that, look, he is under huge pressure, he has to get some points out of those games. Would you be willing to remove yourself from the fence and have a guess as to how many points you think he would need to get to keep his job in December and January? He can't lose all 4 of those games, surely.
No, he can't. He needs, I think he needs to beat Villa. At the very least, they have to be really, really competitive against Villa. But if they draw against Villa, then I think they need to get at least a point or 2 from the next 3. And I just, you look at Haaland, right? A player like Haaland, in the goal-scoring form he's in, and he's monstering centre-backs. And you think, all right, Rodon is having a good season, and he's putting his hand in the air, and I think he's showing leadership. Not been perfect, but he's been good. He's been consistently good. But next to him, if Haaland's up against Biol on what we've seen of late, if Haaland's up against Struijk on if he's hasn't recovered from the little wobble he had before Biol came in, I'd worried. I'd be worried about that game. Liverpool, I think, is a team that still doesn't really know how good it is, or hasn't really decided if it's going to be a proper title challenger this season. If they play like they play against Real Madrid, then I wouldn't give Leeds too much of a hope in that game. But they haven't played like that all season, and they've been decidedly up and down, very, very mixed. So maybe there's an opportunity there. But before the season, would we have looked at those games and thought Leeds will get anything from them? Probably not. That's just the harsh reality of it. These are the elite, and it's probably unfair to expect a team like Leeds to get points. I can hear what people are saying as well. Sunderland are getting points against teams like this, and that's a very fair point. They're going to have to perform out of their skins, and they're going to have to absolutely eradicate the defensive issues we've seen. That's their only hope of points from any of those games. If you give players with the quality that those clubs possess, you give those players time and space in your area, you're going to ship a lot of goals.
Yeah, and look, just to say, I think well, if you'd asked me at the start of the season, will Leeds get points in those games? I'd be picking 9 points across Man City, Liverpool and Chelsea. Chelsea and Liverpool haven't been imperious this season by any stretches. They are both seem to have kind of frailties. They've obviously got huge fixture pile-ups. If Elland Road is a factor and Leeds can be very tight and make it, where you cheer every tackle and the crowd's kind of on them, there's a way Leeds can get points in those games. I think you're right. I think he needs a minimum 3 points in those 4 games to keep his job. But I don't think that can come from 1 win at Villa and then 3 awful performances. I think if he drew with Villa, lost to City and got 2 amazing performances where we get points against Liverpool, Chelsea, that could keep him in the job. I'd like to say we need 4 points from those 4 games to keep and I know this drives people mad when he mentions it in press conferences, but that point per game, if he can come out of those 4 games with 4 points, I think you have to give him the next few. And I know this will enrage some fans. I know it will. I know some fans are completely done with him, and they will say the last 5 games have been defeats, and 3 of them have been really bad. Burnley, Brighton, and Forest have been performances and results that a side who get relegated put in, and there's no getting away from that. I just feel that I look back to the other performances, the Bournemouth, Newcastle, Everton, Wolves, most of West Ham, and I just feel this setup, Farke and this team have warranted enough to have a stab at those 4 games. And look, you're right. Look, there are loads of good accounts of social media as well, where there's nuanced debate. I just think as a whole, social media lends itself to kind of immediate reactionary response. So, a wise man once said to me, take a beat. And that would be my advice to, I do enjoy seeing what the fans have to say and where they disagree and agree with us. But yeah, maybe just take a beat before you respond, and deal with the argument and not the man is my other advice.
Here are the 2 ways I could see this going, right? They beat Villa and they're competitive and they play well, and Elland Road is bouncing, right? It takes the pressure off a little bit the next 3 games, because if you get a point from those 3 games, I think that's fair enough, because we're not asking them to be miracle workers this season. We're just asking them to stay up. If you better that, phenomenal, right? Back on track. And this was a blip, a 2-game blip, a 4-game out of 5 blip. If you lose to Villa and you continue in the vein of performance, then I think Elland Road could turn. I really do. And then I think we're in a completely different situation, a different conversation for the 49ers. They will be hearing it as much as Daniel Farke will be hearing it in the stadium and after the game. And it's then that I think he would be on very, very shaky ground, because then he's going into, I likened it in a piece yesterday to when you're playing Monopoly and, another player, your brother, has an entire street and it's infested with hotels, and you're very cash poor, and you're coming around the corner thinking, if I throw a 4, a 5, or a 7, I'm done for here. That's what those 3 games will look like to Daniel Farke. I think his route to fresh air and safety above the clouds is performances. It's all about performances. He can't lose all 4, right, and say, oh, we were plucky losers, because that's how you go down as well. He's got to reward those performances with at least a win against Villa or a win against someone, but points. But if they're performing well enough that you can see them being competitive again, then I think he's okay. Because I think then the 49ers will say, well, the plan is working. The plan is working again. I just wonder if he needs to go more physical and more direct than he's been willing to commit to get those performances and to make Leeds that solid and competitive.
Yeah, I mean, the games that we've got, particularly, maybe not so much the Villa game, but the route to points in, if there is a route at Man City, is being as defensive and resolute and physical and hoping for a corner in the 40th minute when it's still 0-0 and just getting on the end of something and having something to defend. It isn't trying to play out from the back against Man City and trying to play football. That would be suicide. I say that as part of me still wants to try and take that game on, just as the kind of 11-year-old football manager Chris would have done, and played Nonto, Pirot and James and DCL and gone for them. I'm aware I live in the real world. I'm not enjoying Act 2 that much, Graham, I have to say. We talked about Act 1 and there was lots to enjoy. Act 2 of this story so far is becoming a bit depressing, but we shall see.
Do you know what it's like?
Do
you know what it's like, Chris? It's like it's like in a film where our hero, say, I don't know, they're a detective with a bit of a past, you know, and a complicated relationship situation, and they get a lead on the bad guy, the horrendous serial killer they're trying to find. But instead of like radioing for help, they just go off on their own and they charge straight into danger, and they like running up the stairs instead of going out the front door, you know, like in a horror film. And things are just really, really bleak, and you're thinking, oh, this is it. It's just doomed. That is the moment when you're just waiting for help to arrive, you know, or for some clever twist, or for the hero to pull a rabbit out of a hat and save themselves and save everyone else. I feel like that's where we are right now. I feel like Farke has to pull a win out of the bag against Villa, and there are players in that team that need to step up and pull their manager out of the fire a little bit, because they haven't been doing that. You know, we can talk about tactics, we can talk about defensive organisation and structure, because those things have been at fault. He has to get it right against Villa, but somebody needs to do their job as well.
I can't help but picture a moment where our hero has gunmen facing them and it does look over. Then we hear the gunshots, camera pans round, and it's Agent James and Agent Nonto going, "What were you worried about? Here we are." Let's hope so. There are a couple of other things I think to touch on. Hannibal, has he got charged? Is there an update on that?
Yes, the FA have charged him with misconduct. It's alleged that he spat at or in the direction of Leeds fans during the second half of that game. For anyone who's been living under a rock and is unaware of it, I got a voicemail from someone who was in the stand after the game, letting me know that something had occurred and that police officers had been made aware of an allegation. Lancashire Police confirmed to us on the Sunday that they were working with Burnley to establish the facts, and they were aware of an incident. And then the FA started to look into it as well, and they have looked into it sufficiently to decide that there is a case to answer. And so Hannibal has until about the end of this month to respond, and then he'll go before a panel, and they will decide whether or not he did it, probably based on the balance of probabilities. I think there was footage of it. I don't think we need to play judge and jury on this, but there was footage of it, and if you watch that, it's not clear what happened. It is clear that Leeds fans were angry about something, and a very, very distasteful affair, and we'll let the FA decide. No update as yet from Lancashire Police on whether or not they're following up. So at the moment, it's just the FA that are dealing with it, and we'll wait to see what they decide.
Reserve your festive table at www.uyara.co.uk, where Christmas sparkle meets South Indian soul on Leeds' most sophisticated rooftop terrace. Cool. I just wanted to give a shout out to a show which is on at the moment my wife's in. It's called Mutton. It's written by a big Leeds United fan, Chris Singleton. It was going to be called Dirty Leeds. And it's set in the 1800s in Leeds. It's touring Yorkshire, and it's about a witch, Mary Bateman, and her story and her trial. So yeah, if you want a bit of, I think it opens tomorrow, and it goes to 29th of November, touring Yorkshire. So if you want a bit of escapism in the international break, as I'm sure many people do. Give that a look. Anything more from you, Graham?
It's just to plug the Outside Elland Road podcast, which is the fan equivalent of this show, where you'll get opinions of Leeds United fans every week on what they think. And I think there's only really one big talking point this week, isn't there? And that's Daniel Farke. It'd be very, very interesting, wouldn't it, to be a fly on the wall of the boardroom at the minute to see what they're discussing. It would be a very, very poor show if a football club was not, at the very least, thinking, 2-3 steps ahead, and looking at potential succession plans, because you absolutely have to be prepared. The last thing Leeds United can do is sack Daniel Farke and then spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks trying to get a manager in. I think back to when Jesse Marsh was sacked, and the absolute debacle that ensued with was it Schroeder who was led across the pitch in front of the media, and then there's a massive backlash from fans over that, and then they thought they were going to get Arne Slot, incredibly, which felt a bit about as likely as the time they thought they were going to get Cody Gakpo. What you cannot have is a situation where you go into a decision and you're not fully prepared and briefed for what happens next and what you do next. But there'll definitely be some interesting conversations going on at board level at the minute, because they do not exist in a vacuum, and they are well aware of the noise. And it shouldn't, but it's almost taken me aback a little bit, the scale of the kind of the number of people who expected a corner flag on Monday morning. I think that will maybe have taken 49ers by surprise a little bit, but they don't like to see themselves as a reactive ownership who kind of go off half-cocked. I think they see themselves as taking kind of informed, data-led decisions, sober, sensible ownership. So it'll be absolutely fascinating to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But worrying times, I think, is the politest way of putting it.
Do you find it difficult as a Rangers fan to put on different hats and how you assess the 49ers? Because I know a Rangers fan who was telling me how, at the moment, obviously, 49ers are getting some stick from Leeds fans as well, but it seemed to be there are a number of Leeds fans who obviously maybe look at the Championship and said, well, look, they've got us back in the Premier League. Let's see how they do. And they did what they needed to do across those 2 seasons. It took one season more than many of us thought it should have done. But we're back in the Premier League. So some of us think, they're doing an okay job. Rangers fans don't seem to have that opinion. So do you did you kind of put on your Rangers hat and start grabbing your phone and going on X and having a go at 49ers and then take off and go, well, actually, they're doing it. How do you manage it?
I see the two things as very different. I see the football people at both clubs as different people. So that's a big factor. Ultimately, Parag Marathi is involved at the highest level when it comes to big decisions, but on the football business is being conducted by 2 different departments. I wouldn't say there's much crossover at all. So, I can quite happily get very, very furious at what's going on north of the border and see it as a different thing to what's happening at Leeds. But ultimately, when it comes down to judging club performance, managerial decisions, strength of recruitment, the buck does stop with the owners. The buck stops with the person that gives the green light to spend X amount, to appoint this person in charge of decisions for recruitment, or appoint this manager. So there's no real getting away from it. Like, the 49ers are they're on the hook for all of this at both Leeds and Rangers. And I think it's fair to say that things haven't gone at Ibrox as well as maybe I would have expected. I was expecting them to be a kind of. I saw the way they operated when they came into Leeds that first season as pretty sensible. Maybe a bit too sensible when it came to the recruitment. I feel like they needed a bit more excitement there. They definitely needed a 10. But they got a lot of decisions right, and they operated with a minimum of fuss. That's what I was kind of hoping for at Rangers. Doesn't feel like the decisions have quite been anywhere near as good up there. And if you talk to people up there, they've kind of been surprised at knowing how things went at Leeds that it hasn't tallied at Rangers, although different boardroom makeup, obviously, not full control. So you do have to say that. But it's definitely interesting times for Parag at both of his football clubs.
And just to close then, do they have you mentioned the Rangers managerial recruitment being a bit of a mess, and obviously when Jesse Marsh was sacked, it was the same here. Is it the case that I'm sure every club has a list of like 3 to 4 names that they're like, okay, if the worst happens or our manager leaves or whatever happens or we need to sack him, this is our list? Is it that these people weren't sounded out in advance to see if they're interested? Can you even do that? How does it end up looking like a bit of a mess externally? Is it because you haven't done due diligence? It can't be the case that they're sat there, oh God, we've got no one. Let's have a look on Google who's available. They must have some sort of
they have.
Even Man City must have a legacy kind of project just in case Guardiola decides to leave.
Yeah, there are long lists and short lists. I remember talking to a manager who was in work in the National League who'd been made aware that he was on Brighton's kind of long list for down the line, for years down the line. They definitely do work with lists. The problem is that you don't want to start any fires. So what you don't want is to make an approach to a manager and that emerge in the press while your manager's still in situ, because it completely undermines him. It completely destroys your relationship and the trust that you have with him. But you do need to know who might be available, who might want it. A problem is that you might get led up the garden path by a representative of a manager who says, yeah, we'd be interested in a conversation. Then you have the conversation and he says, I want this in January and I'm going to play this way and I want all of my staff with me and I'm going to cost this much. Maybe it's too rich for your blood. Maybe he's too much of a manager and not a head coach. Maybe he's not going to quite see eye to eye with your director of recruitment. There's so many things that can emerge in a conversation that you weren't previously aware of. So there's definitely a fine balance to be struck. But you would definitely urge a club to do the utmost due diligence so that you don't have a scenario where you think, right, we're going to go and get Carlos Corberan, right? Knows the club, has been here before, can be pragmatic. Let's go and get him. And we think he'd like to come here. And then you go and sign him out. And then 2 days later, it's announced that he's got a brand new contract at Valencia. And you find yourself played. You don't want a situation like that, do you? So find balance and lots to think about.
And hopefully we win our next 4 games and we don't have that dilemma to even contemplate. Okay, we will check in next week ahead of. We haven't even talked about internationals, but we can touch on what's happened to the Leeds United players playing for various international clubs, if anyone is interested in that next week, and we'll preview Villa. Until then, play nice, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Bye for now.